We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. It is week 10, but before we get there, I want to bring in our weekly guest from The Athletic. You know him on Twitter at AllInKid. Of course, Jake Seeley. How was your week 9, man? Before we get into all this week 10 stuff, get into double digits, I want to know how your week was, man. How's it going?
Unfortunately, I tweeted about it yesterday. 80% Justin Jackson equaled about 20% lost this week. I still cashed or made out on a few lineups, but overall, because I had like 80% Justin Jackson. So between him and having, I'd say, close to that entire locket as well, it was good enough for a couple spots, but still not quite good enough for others. The worst was watching that one lineup that I had with Justin Jackson be up like, I think I was like top 100 in one lineup, and then just watching it tick down slowly as the 4 o'clock games went on.
So rough, man. Someone in the chat was just saying they lost their fantasy matchup by 1 point and they had Justin Jackson in. There was a ton of stuff like that. Our CEO for i3 Interactive was basically going to win a qualifier. All he had to do was have Justin Jackson get literally 12 points. He had everything else blocked and then did not get his 12 points, as we know. So that's like a 6-figure swing for Chris, which was rough. But yeah, man, the amount of mentions I got on Twitter about Christian McCaffrey when he started just going absolutely ham was pretty great. People giving me permission to play Christian McCaffrey, all that stuff. I did not have him on my main team. I was scared off like everyone else with the report that came out in the morning about him actually splitting work with Davis. So did you see that? I can't remember if it was Schefter who it was. There was someone on Sunday morning that came out and said there was going to be splitting carries. Rappaport. Yeah. So did you get on that? Did you not care or what? I had no CMC.
Didn't care. So I'd say one of the things, and I've even not listened to myself, but one of the things is I know that they have insight to teams, that being the Schefter, the Rappaports, and beat writers, including the people over at The Athletic. I give credit to a lot of things. They call some things. Like the guy who writes about the Raiders said that if an injury or opportunity popped up, Nelson Aguilar would be a thing this year. He was right. So when it comes to week stuff, I kind of ignore it. A perfect example of what I'm talking about where I ignored myself is I kept saying, the usage of Hasty told me Jerick McKinnon was the guy if healthy. And I was like, Jerick McKinnon's the guy. Jerick McKinnon's the guy. And then all last week, it was like, well, Hasty's getting lead reps. Hasty's going to be the guy because they still want to keep Jerick McKinnon, low on touches, because whatever. And you saw what happened. It was Jerick McKinnon. I should have listened to myself. I think that beat reporters of like the Schefters and the Rappaports kind of trick us more than they help us. What I would look for is late injuries, or like legitimate, he messed up something on Thursday. They're benching him for the first quarter because, whatever. So I wouldn't trust them to speculate on usage is basically what I'm getting at. So I didn't listen to the Christian McCaffrey news. Actually had Christian McCaffrey because you and I talked about last week. I said, you agreed with me. This is the cheapest you were going to get Christian McCaffrey. And there's somebody I want to talk about today for that very same reason. But I generally don't go into that unless it's something like significant and tangible. Speculating on touches, I'd never buy into.
Good for you, man. When Ian Rappaport tweeted that out, I was scared off. It's not that I actually, that's the one thing I'm not mad about. I didn't have Dalvin Cook on it. I had him on my main team, so I can't be upset about that, obviously. I also played Lamar, which is a whole nother story. But I think that the premise of the Christian McCaffrey play is that you're paying that discount for the ceiling. You don't care. If he doesn't get there, it doesn't matter anyway because you've already paid $8,500 for a guy. Your lineup's dead. So even that came out, maybe that should even made me like him even more because people are going to get scared off of him regardless of the injury or whatever was going to happen. So have some regrets there for sure. Before we dive into it, man, what is going on with Lamar? I get that he got 18 points. He was super cheap, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But I had the Lamar Andrews instead of bringing it back with the cheap wide receiver. I ended up bringing it back with Pascal. Got him at 1%, so I felt pretty good about my lineup. Just went through all that with the chat. But what are your thoughts on what's going on? This offense looked terrible for 90% of that game.
So Rich Rebar, a friend of ours in the industry, tweeted this out earlier this morning about first down, that they've only let Lamar Jackson pass. It's about 33% of the time. By far the bottom of the league. By far, we've seen the tell of when you're kind of that predictable, what it can do to offense. And it's strange to me. I'm not one to question Harbaugh to this level. Jim Harbaugh is a different story in college. But the John Harbaugh, what they did with Lamar Jackson last year kind of said, wow, this team knows what they're doing. This knows how to get the best out of Lamar Jackson. And we all expected a reduced rate of running to keep Lamar Jackson healthy, but we also expected the touchdown ratio to come back down to earth. Not necessarily like he can't still be good, but last year's numbers was like the 2016 Atlanta Falcons. We knew it would come back a little bit just because that's how sports work. At the same time, it's become all three factors now. He's running less, he's passing for a lower touchdown rate, and whatever they're doing has just become so predictable. When we can sit there, we're not NFL players, we're not NFL coaches. When we can sit there and know what the Ravens are doing, that how do you not expect NFL teams to stop this? And that's why it's been so disappointing. They need to, though everybody loves the hashtag free, they need to free, like, just let the chains off Lamar Jackson. Let him pass. Let him make some mistakes on first down if he's going to. But get Lamar Jackson to be more of a threat to defenses besides just being able to. Essentially, I joked and said back to Rich, is they've created the Kelvin Gilbride offense from back with the Giants day. Run on first down, pass on second and long, run a draw on 3rd and 8, and go punt. That's what he did all the time.
Man, you have like the most dynamic, arguably, like quarterback we've ever seen, and you're not gonna like just like after what he did last year, just like give him the keys a little bit, just like, all right, yeah, make some mistakes out there, do your thing. Like, we'll live with like the problems that come from that, as he's not just like the most perfect passer in the world, obviously, as we know. But it's been rough, and it's been tough on the bank account, because I just keep going back to the well with him, with Mark Andrews, with Hollywood, with all that stuff. So that's been pretty rough. Anything else?
Andrews has been killing me. I said I liked Andrews last
year. You love
week
Andrews. You loved Andrews last year before anyone did.
Yeah, and he's been a killer mostly because of this. And, the touchdown volume on Marquise Brown hasn't really been there. And Marquise Brown's, he's actually ahead of his receiving number. Actually, I don't know. It might have come back to almost equal after another down game, but it was a little bit ahead of last year's pace. Just the touchdowns weren't there. Again, he was touchdown volume last year is 7, I think it was, on like 500 yards. So the concern there was like, okay, touchdowns come back down to earth. Maybe he only catches 5 this year, but we hope for more receptions and more yards. Again, a lot of people were talking about for the entire Russell Wilson career, like why I hate that cliche term, because we're still getting it thrown at. Let Russell Wilson cook, and they're letting him cook this year. Like the guy's throwing out a feast every single week. But at this point, like, how do you not, like, Lamar Jackson? Can he like turn the stove on? Can we get maybe some boiling water at some point? Like, just something.
I have no idea, man. I thought that this was the week. He was extremely cheap. They were daring us to play him on DraftKings. The same thing with Mark Andrews, man. So I don't know. It's not that I'm out. I'm just I watched some of that game, and it was not pretty. Any other, I guess, takeaways from last week before we move in the first look?
It was a week where if you didn't have Cook and or McCaffrey, you were kind of hurt at running back. It was one of the biggest discrepancies from top 2 running backs to everybody. I mean, hell, Kalen Ballage he was either top 5 or close to it. I mean, that just tells you what kind of week we had.
Definitely. All right, let's jump into our Week 10 DFS first look. So we have Jake Seeley with us from The Athletic. Of course, per usual, we're going to dive into the quarterback position first. And Jake, one thing that I think that was kind of interesting as we're kind of looking through this right off the bat is that Kyler Murray, still very expensive, but now he's $8K in this spot against Buffalo. Russell Wilson, he's more expensive than Russell Wilson, who's $7,700. Aaron Rodgers, $7,900. Josh Allen is back up to $75. And then there's a little bit of a teardrop here because it's a little bit of a different slate overall, which we'll get to at running back. But I guess, what were your thoughts already at seeing Kyler Murray at the top? He's just been balling out, his rushing ability, all of those things. This game against Buffalo should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that's why. It's the rushing ability. He's essentially running like Lamar Jackson was last year, but also passing like Lamar Jackson was last year. We've talked about for weeks that for a while there, he was throwing 200 yards, but throwing 3 touchdowns on top of it. And I don't want to keep hammering this point home, but I don't know how the Ravens just don't look at the Cardinals and say, what the hell are we doing? And I know they don't have a DeAndre Hopkins, but why would you rein in Lamar Jackson when you're watching Kyler Murray do what we would hope that Lamar Jackson would just do for a second time? He's already done it. So Kyler Murray at 8,000, that's because here's my problem with Kyler Murray. It's just not even his own price. You want to pair him with DeAndre Hopkins. Like, you're not just going to roll out a naked Kyler Murray. And the problem is now if you do that with DeAndre Hopkins and you have a week like you did last week, you probably still survive, even though Hopkins had a bad game. But if you pay up for Hopkins, I mean, you're done. I mean, you're not getting Dalvin Cook if it's on the slate. You're not getting Christian McCaffrey. You're not getting any of the top end running backs if you pair those two together. And that's the biggest issue with Kyler Murray. So maybe you hope for maybe a Christian Kirk game like we just had and do that. But I mean, now, I just feel like you're kind of setting yourself up for a tough lineup.
It's tough, man. And we were asking ourselves that with the tilt space lineups as we were doing like some late swaps. We did have a Kyler team with DeAndre Hopkins, and we're like, should we move this out? We're like, no, we need the ceiling from Hopkins, all those things. And then that's what can go wrong with these wide receivers. And we'll get to that, I'm sure, when we talk about Devonta Adams and his price tag at wide receiver, which is pretty aggressive, but nice to see. At the top end, though, there's definitely some good spots here. Russell Wilson against the Rams. Like, say what you want about the Rams, 29th at defending the deep ball. I think that's an interesting spot to go back to Russ in this one overall. Josh Allen at 7,500. I'm not scared of that. It was nice to see him get back on track, but we assumed that would happen last week against Seattle, right? Do you think it's a little bit of chasing to go back to to Josh Allen here? He's throwing it to all these weird targets, so that kind of scared me a little bit. But I don't know. What do you think about I guess Josh Allen coming forward in this week when he just blew up, but another decent matchup, I guess.
Well, I think that's the thing, is it's another decent matchup. You saw what they're allowed to do defensively for the opponents in that last game. And if Kylo Murray and the offense is going to push the pace on top of it, Josh Allen, I tweeted you yesterday, you know that. It was naked Josh Allen week because nobody was playing that. But Stephon Diggs was still a good pairing with him. I think that's where I would still continue to look. If you can get Diggs, I would look to pair those two. Mostly, John Brown's a shot in the dark. Whether or not he's kind of the Marquise Brown, you hope he gets a touchdown and has a big day. But yeah, Josh Allen just feels like a Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. I'm always gonna, I say always. I probably not is probably the right word. I will always have a Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs stack. I have for all 8 weeks so far. Well, 7. Have they had their bye, right?
I think so.
It's already week 10. I'm already starting to forget things.
Dude, it's like it all blends into like one big like month/week/season, and then it's like, okay, we blink and it's playoff time. So really interesting. I guess I'm looking through like some of the cheaper guys. Like, it is a pretty decent tier drop after Kyler, Rodgers, and Wilson.
It is.
Deshaun Watson 6,900 against Cleveland. I think that one's kind of interesting. They've been pretty decent against the deep ball, but all the efficiency metrics will tell you that Watson is still having a really strong season.
Love Watson.
I think that 6,900 seems like a great price tag for him, right? He stands out.
It does, and I also tweeted you on the other one. I finally got Will Fuller right. I can never get Will Fuller right.
You had a hell of a week. Are you rich over there? I'm surprised you showed up for the show.
No, I told you I lost money this week. It was all the Tyler Lockett and Justin Jackson killed me. But yeah, Deshaun Watson. I'll go back to him and Will Fuller in this matchup. Although I feel like I'm risking things by going to Will Fuller twice in a row, so everybody might want to stay away at this point. But with this, yeah, I think that once you get to Deshaun Watson, he feels like the only savings to me as I was looking through these, because everybody right behind him, the ceiling's not really different. It's actually not. It's not different from anybody down in the 5,000s. I was looking at the game logs and I was going through it, and Justin Herbert's up there for consistency, but he's only got 2 30-point games. Actually, no, I don't even know if he's got 2 or just 1, and then one was really close. You go down to all the way, which I'm going to bring up his name if you don't when we get to it, but there's guys in the $5,000 range that don't hit 20 consistently, but have a 30-point game on their resume, or a 28, and a 29 on their. It's like, so unless you're going Watson, I don't see any reason to go to Goff and Breeze and Brady and Herbert, because I don't think there's any difference to them in the 5,000 guys.
That's the thing, man. And yeah, I mean, just in general, man, I've heard people, like, even last week, like the Drew Lock people getting there in the fourth quarter is somewhat frustrating, because I thought that he was probably the best play down there, but I did feel like it was pretty clearly a week where these like expensive dual threat quarterbacks should have been a priority for us, like getting up to the Russell Wilsons, Josh Allens, Kyler Murrays, those guys. You're
not calling Drew Lock people donkeys, are you?
I'm not calling them donkeys, because that was like if you are paying down, this is the guy, but I will not be there. That's what I said. Okay. So basically,
I did have Drew Lock. I had Drew Lock, and that killed me. I had Drew Lock, and
are you ready to admit that it looked really bad for 90% of that game again?
Oh, 100%, 100%. That lineup didn't end up cashing anyway, because I did Drew. I paid up for Julio in that lineup, so I had Julio, Tyler Lockett, Justin Jackson, and somebody else I paid up for, and the 4 people in that lineup that I paid up for weren't enough to even overcome the rest of it. Like Locke and Judy weren't enough for what went wrong in that lineup.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was bad by any means, but I think there's more opportunity cost at quarterback with what we're seeing in this like new NFL with all of these dual threat guys, to where, yeah, they're expensive at the top, but I do think it's kind of worth it in some ways. Like, you're getting half of a running back with some of these guys, literally, that there's just no way that some of these pocket passers like Stafford, like Carr, they got to throw 6 touchdown passes to come anywhere near these guys that are throwing like 3 or 4 and rushing. You know what I mean? So I know you know that, but I'm just like, I think that that's something that still people like. Why are we talking about Ben Roethlisberger? Like, why?
I've been saying that all year. He's turned into Drew Brees with the yards per attempt and the air yards.
I don't get it.
Although, and even Drew Brees off 4 touchdowns, it wasn't even that great of a day for.
It's not.
Yeah.
So like it's, I don't know. I'm gonna let other people mess around with those guys, and I'm just gonna continue to play Kylo Murray.
Can we get Taysom Hill? Is Taysom Hill at quarterback or is it at tight end?
I think on FanDuel you can still play him as tight end. We talk about that all the time in the community, because I played him in like as a tight end in a playoff week, and just like it was quarterback. The best thing. Yeah, that's rough. All right. Well, anything else at quarterback? Any of the cheaper guys that you like? I don't really know if there's. Okay, let's hear it.
100%. Everybody, I think, is going to go to Tua at 5,600 after what just happened against the Chargers and kind of play that matchup. I'm still worried about Tua volume. Like, I don't necessarily see a 300-yard game out of Tua, despite we love to see that he ran. So I'm going $100 higher to Joe Burrow, who is one of those quarterbacks I was talking about, who's already had a 30-point game and a 28-point game. And Pittsburgh, despite being a good defense, gets beat by the big play. I've said this to you at least 5 or 6 times this year, and just not to you as in like you don't know this, but on this show, is that you can attack Pittsburgh deep and you get Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, AJ Green, and Joe Burrow's aggressiveness. And I think that at 5,700, that was the one I was going to bring up. What's the difference between Drew Brees, Jared Goff, Justin Herbert, and Joe Burrow? Nothing except for consistency. So if you're going for the ceiling, there's no reason to pay the extra 1,000 when he has the same ceiling as those guys. I know you don't play cash, but you play those guys in cash, those 6,000 guys. Joe Burrow is your tournament play versus those guys.
That was actually going to be one of my questions for you, is that, like, yes, he's gotten that discount in price because, yeah, DraftKings, they don't always adjust it based on matchup, but when they do, they get pretty aggressive with this. So this Pittsburgh defense, they move Joe Burrow all the way down to 5,700. He hasn't been there in quite some time. He's the 3rd highest quarterback on the slate if you're just looking at an efficiency metric that I really like, completion percentage above or below expectation. He's right there with Russell Wilson. For the record, Russell Wilson is number 1. So I think that Joe Burrow, at a price discount, at definitely an ownership discount, you know that he'll run a little bit. He's got the weapons. I'm all about this play, man. I'm not scared to go against some of these defenses. So I think that he fits the bill as someone that if you are going to pay down and get away from some of these elite options, that he makes some sense. It's going to depend on what we get in terms of, I guess, opening up some of the salary a little bit. But I like it quite a bit. Let's move on to running back, though. So interesting, obviously, like Christian McCaffrey goes out there, gets hurt again. Now he's got a shoulder injury. So I didn't even get to play him last week, Jake, and now he's hurt again. So he's at the top. He's 9K if he does play. Alvin Kamara. What's that?
I said maybe. The report came back. Rule said it's day-to-day, not week-to-week. So
that's good.
Cross your fingers. You might get him.
Okay, right on. I might be able to later in the week give people permission to play Christian McCaffrey. But Alvin Kamara, 8,200. Aaron Jones, 7,100. James Conner with a flop last week for a lot of people that really needed him in the late game. So he is 6,900. There's not like this just like massive ceiling floor combo of these like elite running backs on this slate outside of Kamara, maybe Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones, I mean, he's probably as close as we have to Alvin Kamara right now, right? So I assume you're on him.
Yeah, Aaron Jones as my Monday lineup that I always tell you to do. He is in my Monday lineup with Aaron Jones, Joe Burrow so far. There's another running back we haven't talked about yet. But Kamara's concern immediately was, we saw it happen. The concern of this guy right here being back on the field. Mm-hmm. The numbers with and without Michael Thomas on the field, the receiving numbers for Kamara aren't as great. They're still good. They're not just as great. They're not Christian McCaffrey receiving numbers. And it immediately took an effect. Again, it's not that Kamara's bad. It's not that he's ever a bad play. But at 8,200, I say there's not the necessity to go after him because there's not that ceiling that we used to have because Thomas on the field significantly impacts his receiving game.
So Aaron Jones is 7,100 if you can only project
Yes.
him for like 18 touches or so. Devonta Adams, very expensive, who again we'll get to, but he just continues to just be this gravitational pull for this offense no matter what. Are you paying 7,100 for Aaron Jones? There's just not a lot of elite options, so we're going to have to find some ways to make this work at running back this week.
I am actually attacking both running backs in this game. James Robinson, as you know, that I've said for a long time that if weeks ago we would have put Fournette on the back of his jersey, everybody would be on board with him. All he does is continue to go out there and post double digits every single game. All he does is continue to look great every single game. The Green Bay Packers defenses target your running backs against them every single week. And you tell me James Robinson at 6,600 in this game with Jake Luton looking more than capable back there, at least at Gardner Minshew's level. I'm concerned in the passing game in this one if Jair Alexander is out there, and I know you don't play as much into the matchups, but I think that when you're talking about Chark versus Alexander would be somewhat concerning for the passing game, but nobody's really rolling out Jake Luton. But Aaron Jones versus James Robinson, I have both of those running backs. I think they're two of the best plays this week, even regardless of price, and you're getting still a discount on James Robinson because he's 6,600, and Aaron Jones for his ceiling. We know his ceiling is being the number one running back any given week. Jacksonville and Green Bay are two of the best defenses to target for running backs.
That's interesting. I know you mentioned the Jair Alexander thing. He is in the concussion protocol. Looks like he will be cleared before Sunday. Obviously, very early in the week. So, but just keep an eye on that one for all you running back or all you wide receiver, cornerback people out there. I will not be with you. But I think that like this is a really interesting running back slate to where like I don't really like a lot of these guys, to be completely honest. So we'll see what happens, obviously, with Justin Jackson and that injury. But obviously, I know we're not quite to the waiver wire section of this, but I assume you like at least one Chargers running back in this spot, right? What is his price?
Dude, Joshua Kelly.
He's 4,400. Yeah.
Yep. If I can't say it enough, Justin Jackson is out. That's the only way I will like Joshua Kelly, just because Troymaine Pope just last week, before yesterday, depending on when people are looking at this, so 2 weeks ago now, depending, that's the risk if he's out there and healthy. And so, well, also Kalen Ballage. So Joshua Kelly, yes, in seasonal, Joshua Kelly is a better running back, but I don't trust this backfield at all. So I think you can really make a case for either one of them. Again, if Justin Jackson's out there, I would just actually slam Justin Jackson right back into your lineup because Justin Jackson's price is still only 4,700.
They're both cheap, man. Like that's what made it such a weird pricing play last week.
Well, because they're playing a hot hand in
the
game. They're playing. It's like hot hand as the game goes. The one that I will say for waivers, I didn't throw this one to you on waivers because I want to bring him up as a waiver / DFS play. We were going to do it now, and that's why is Duke Johnson if there is no David Johnson. And I will present one thing, as I mentioned to you last week with the Chase Edmonds situation. There is a risk that just like Chase Edmonds, Duke Johnson, as we've seen before, as we just saw in that game, he's not good when he's given 20 touches. Chase Edmonds didn't look great. He was the same Chase Edmonds. He just did it on more touches, so he was less efficient. But if there is no David Johnson, with the fact that there's really no backups worth anything behind Duke Johnson, in this matchup, it's a really good one. Duke Johnson at 5,000 is going to feel pretty chalky. And of course, you could get the letdown of the Edmonds and the Alexander Mattisons of the world. But in some lineups, he's not a real free square like Jamal Williams was. But you do have to take that savings in some of your lineups if you're going to be paying up.
So if we've made it to Duke Johnson, I think it's time to move over to the wide receiver portion of this. So yeah, let's talk about this price tag for Devonta Adams. He's $9K. He's 9,500 on FanDuel, obviously against Jacksonville, who doesn't have anyone that can probably cover him. Not that many people can. Pretty decent sized tier gap between DeAndre Hopkins, who's 7,700, DK Metcalf right behind at 76, Stephon Diggs still at 75, and then Michael Thomas at 74. A lot of elite, like we don't have a lot of elite running backs to pay up for in the slate, but there are some elite wide receivers. Are you paying up for Devonta Adams this week, Jake? Is he in your lineup? Is there someone in the chat that said, Jake, stop giving away my lineup on a Monday? Seems like a lot of people are on the same page as you right now.
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of smart viewers. Yeah, that's evident so far, is what we're saying. Devonta Adams feels tough. That's 2019 pricing on Michael Thomas, but it's hard to argue against it. It's just when it finally stops, it's going to be pretty frustrating. Alan Lazard might be back this week, and if he is back, maybe they just don't need to. That being Aaron Rodgers just doesn't need to target him as much, and there's a little bit of a letdown. So the fact that DeAndre Hopkins is coming off a down game for 7,700, I feel like people are just going to be annoyed with what just happened. So if you are going that route, I don't mind Hopkins. Metcalf at this point, look, I was on I mentioned it 3 times already. I was on Tyler Lockett because you beat the Bills in the slot and over the middle of the field. It should have been a Tyler Lockett game, but he's only got 2 good games. The other games have been down. And DK Metcalf's is almost perfectly consistent this entire year, even against Ramsey. Like at this point, how do you not play Metcalf over Lockett if you're going to one of those receivers? I love Diggs, but the one I'm going to bring up, I told you it was coming. I'm going to compare him to Christian McCaffrey. This might be the last time you can get Michael Thomas at 7,400. If he goes off this week, which he can do, it's going to be done for. You're never getting him at 7,400. You're probably not getting him at sub 8,000 again.
Yeah, so we didn't really have these elite running backs, but we have some guys we can just toss into the flex, I think, that are going to give us crazy amounts of volume for like a roughly same price tag as some of those running backs. So I'm with you. DK Metcalf, I think we just need to start saying it's a bad matchup for the cornerback, not necessarily a bad matchup for him. That guy is a baller. Like I can't even begin to say what happened with DK Metcalf. They taught him how to run more than one route, and now he just bulldozes over people. Or has he always been this good? He needed to kind of he's young. Obviously, he's very, very young. Right. But man, he has arrived.
He hasn't improved that much with his route. He has improved some, but this is why Pete Carroll got an extension, being 7,000 years old still in the NFL, is because this team didn't force DK Metcalf to be something he's not. Like there's a lot of teams that try to do things like similar. We talked about the Ravens earlier. They changed their offense from Lamar Jackson. Well, a lot of times you'll see people try to change the player from college and try to ask him to do more or less or do this, do that. They're not asking him to run curl routes. They're not asking him to run comebacks and over the middle. Just go be you. And that's why it's working, because DK Metcalf being DK Metcalf is a dominant problem for defenses. And why would you even take a talent like that and ask him to run an 8-yard curl? And that's what they're doing. They're not. They're just letting him be himself, and that's why it's working. So he hasn't actually improved that much as a route runner. He has improved a little bit, but he's just that good. Some other wide receivers I like here is if you're going to play this game, just bring it back with either Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, and I feel like Kupp's going to be the higher owned one. So if you want to go for Woods and maybe one of those volume kind of Keenan Allen games where it's 10 receptions for 110 yards, that would be intriguing in this one as well.
I feel like the Rams haven't been on the main slate in a while, because I'm just looking at some of the data points on them. Like Cooper Kupp still 0.6 weighted opportunity, Robert Woods 0.5. Like both these guys are still seeing a condensed target share for the most part for the Rams. So right. I like that call. Like that, this game is very easily stackable. It's expensive, but there's ways to, even if you don't end up playing Russ, you can probably get creative with some mini stacks here and feel pretty good about your correlation. It finally happened, Jake. Terry McLaurin is no longer 5,700, which it feels like he's been 5,700 for weeks.
Well,
his price is 6,800 now. So are we out on Terry McLaurin now, or is he still now he's priced correctly in my opinion? So what do you think about McLaurin at 6,800?
He's priced correctly, but he deserves to be in this conversation because he's the number one and he's still actually go back to Keenan Allen. He's similar to Keenan Allen. He gets so much volume every single week. You always talk about we keep talking about corners already, and I told you that in the first matchup that be a little bit concerned about Bradbury against him, and he did some of his work not against Bradbury in the first matchup, but even yesterday, similar to that, did some work against Bradbury, but was able to take care of everybody else when he wasn't out there just because of the volume alone. The one slight concern you could say is, well, Alex Smith for a full game, does he target him that heavy? Does he look to Logan Thomas a little bit more? Does he look to Steven Sims, who just finally got back on the field in that game, albeit a limited fashion? I'm not saying I'm that concerned yet, but that would be the only risk with Terry McLaurin. But I don't think that's at 6,800. I'm still rolling out Terry McLaurin against the Lions. The Lions have nobody left still. This entire season they have had nobody in that secondary.
I'm with you, man. One guy that is another guy that we talk about a lot that I probably don't get always right, especially last year when he had that blow up game. But quietly, Brandon Cooks has been really good. So I'm trying to figure out. Yes. You were talking about Will Fuller before. If we like Watson this week at that price tag, who are you pairing him with?
I would get off. So you might want to play Will Fuller because I'm not going to go back to him for a second week in a row and jinx myself. I would just go to Brandon Cooks for the discount because Brandon Cooks, yes, has been actually one of the stacks. One of the ones that I did actually cash a little bit was a Watson Cooks Fuller stack, surprisingly enough. I rarely do that. But Cooks has been really good. Outside, we were surprised. I say we as the fantasy community were really surprised that game where he's out there and at a 0, despite being out there for, what was it, 97% of the snaps or something like that. And that's when everybody got really scared. But since then, he's been top 20, I'd say potentially top 15. So you could always have the risk that he gets completely left out, because that's what happens with anybody in this offense. Watson, won't hone in. I think that's the thing, is like Watson's a smarter quarterback than people give him credit for. Even when Hopkins was there, Hopkins could have a down week because he just found out what was working that week and was going to whoever might, like Kenny Stills games that he occasionally had. So there's always that chance, but I feel like Fuller and Cooks are really the guys now. You don't see him spreading the ball that much to Randall Cobb and the others at this point. Akins is, he was involved a little bit, but it's still those two. It's not too dissimilar from the Rams at this point.
So it wasn't Tyreek Hill. It wasn't DJ Chark. It wasn't A.J. Brown. It wasn't Chase Claypool. The leader in air yards last week, Jerry Jeudy, 237 air yards in that game on 14 targets. So his price hasn't moved a ton. He's 5,600 against Vegas. Any thoughts on him? Like I'm trying to just like look in that mid range to see if anyone stands out, but that was a pretty nice coming out party for Jeudy for sure.
There's a couple right here. I mean, Christian Kirk, 5,700, 100 more than him.
Mm-hmm.
T. Higgins is here at 5,500. If Debo's back, he's at 54. You could easily get some price savings in this wide receiver range here. But yeah, Jerry Jeudy, I told you at the top, that was a few of my lineups. The bad thing was all the lock Jeudy lineups were so much savings that all the payoffs were all those. Not a single one of those lineups hit money wise, because those were almost essentially the only two that did anything in those. But Jeudy, the one thing I talked about this on our athletic podcast is when they talk about Tim Patrick is back, and yeah, Tim Patrick scored a touchdown, but it was a low day overall reception and yards wise. Is Jeudy in that time that Patrick was out was able to continue to build his rapport and his game, and he is now the guy. It took a little bit of time because he's a rookie, but Judy's the guy now. Judy's the guy over Patrick. Judy's the guy over Hamler. Judy's the guy over the rest of them. It's not going to be that kind of volume every single week, but I think going forward, until he's in the 6,000 plus range, he's going to feel like a great play against. I mean, who are you scared of him facing outside of top corners? And I know you don't even care about the top corners.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it overall. We'll have to dig a little bit deeper into wide receiver as the week goes on. Let's talk about tight end quickly, Jake, before we get into some waiver wire discussions. Jordan Reed, 3,500. Do we just play him and move on? I know it wasn't a fantastic week overall, but he seems like the cheap option. Obviously, if we're paying all the way up, George Kittle is no longer on the slate. Obviously, 6,600. That would have been a nice price tag for him. But the top end guy, Darren Waller, 5,900, and then it drops off pretty quickly. Hawkinson, Fant, Gronk is up to 4,700 now. So I guess tight end's just been kind of a dumpster fire overall so far this year. But this is a week where I'm probably going to be looking to pay down.
Yeah, so I immediately put Jordan Reed in there. He was on a snap count, quote unquote, in that first game back.
Right.
A lot of people reporting covered that said that he probably wouldn't even been active if not for either the situation with George Kittle, and they just needed him, and all the other injuries out there. But Jordan Reed, healthy, if he's going to get full blow against the Saints, and the Saints are very susceptible to tight ends, Jordan Reed feels like a great play. I'm going to go back to somebody who paid off for me last week, and I hated him, and I didn't tell you this because we didn't talk about him last week. I don't think that we did, if I'm remembering correctly, but I ended up with a lot of Evan Ingram, and I've hated him until that point, but the price had come so far down, and Daniel Jones just insists throwing into him time and time and time again, even when there's a defender on his back. And that's part of the problem of why I haven't liked Ingram, is because Daniel Jones doesn't throw to him while he's open. But he's essentially kind of turned into the number one wide receiver because Daniel Jones just targets the living hell out of him. And against Philly for 4,500, I feel like that's a decent play, because if you get 50 yards and a touchdown, that's going to be worthwhile, 45, even 55.
Yeah, I like that one. I ended up playing him on some mini correlations with Mclaurin. I kind of warmed up to Mclaurin as like the morning was, I guess, progressing. So yeah, I'm with you, man. He was right there. Saw a decent amount of work. Obviously, he scores that touchdown, but he also had 10 targets. Only completed 5 of them because we know where the targets are coming from. But I like Evan Ingram quite a bit. He's the guy that we were like very bullish on coming into the year. At least I was relative to some of the other options in that range. I don't know. It doesn't feel like I always struggle with clicking Darren Waller because I find someone that's a little bit cheaper that just makes my lineup work overall. Hawkinson at 5,100 against Washington. But yeah, you mentioned it. Evan Ingram against Philly. Philly's 31st in the league at defending the short area of the field, so I like that one quite a bit. What do we think about?
I don't get the Hawkinson price drop. He's got 3 straight weeks of about 15 points, and he drops $200 against Washington. I don't get that.
That's interesting. Is Golladay still going to be out?
He's supposed to be. He's supposed to miss multiple weeks.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one at 5,100 then, kind of below that Waller tier. So that's an interesting one for sure. Dallas Goddard, 4,200. I expected him to come back and be a lot better, right? What do you think about Goddard at 42? I mean, great matchup against the Giants, 29th defending the short area.
29th for the short area, but actually really good against tight ends.
Really?
So that's the interesting thing. Yeah. Yeah, so my APA has the Giants allowing an average of 9.5 fantasy points to tight ends. They've been really, and they limited Logan Thomas. Whatever it is about their defense, there's a few things that they've gotten right, and I don't put this on Gettleman. I put it on Patrick Graham, their defensive coordinator. For the talent that he has on defense, he's been getting the most out of it. And the one thing that they're getting is some decent defense against the run and tight ends. They're exploitable against wide receivers because they really only have Bradbury back there. That all being said, it's still an interesting play because Dallas Goddard is one of 3 weapons in the passing game, being Fulgham, Jalen Reagor, and Dallas Goddard, that you would think Wentz would see a lot of. And I would go to Goddard similar to Jordan Reed. The first game back just wasn't 100% out there for all the snaps back into the mix, but it's not a smash matchup. So, but I still like the price at 42.
Yeah, every now and then, just using those short and deep metrics, there's like something that falls through the cracks that just kind of is like that exception. That would definitely be one of those.